The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Energy bills to rise by more than expected as the price cap increases by 6.4% from April. 3 years into the war in Ukraine, while Europe is still dependent on Moscow for its gas. Plus, the government tries to win over angry farmers, but won't back down over its changes to inheritance tax. Very good morning and welcome to Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. I'm going to start with some breaking news this morning. Let's go straight to our city editor, Mark Kleiman. Mark, something got to do with cricket, I believe.
Yeah, that's right, Darren. Some big news this morning from the world of cricket. And of course, we've been talking a lot about the business of cricket recently because of the lucrative auction of the England and Wales Cricket Board's stakes in the 800 tournament franchises. But what I can reveal this morning is that the 161-year-old Middlesex County Cricket Club is reviewing its mutual status for the first time in its long history. Now, Middlesex was founded at the Lord's Tavern back in 1864, and it's been a tenant at Lord's Cricket Ground, the most famous ground in cricket globally since the 1870s. Now, as I understand it, Middlesex County Cricket Club has brought in advisors from a firm called Oakvale, which specialises in sports advisory roles, to review whether ending Middlesex's mutual ownership would make sense. Now, Middlesex has about 7,000 members, and for any vote on demutualisation to be valid, at least 50% of its members would need to cast their ballots. In addition, of the members who vote, 75% would need to vote in favour. But that is a long way off. As I understand it, the review is at its very early stages. The possibility of demutualisation and a sale of the club or a stake in the club are just one of the options that will be considered. But it's notable that in recent years, 2 or 3 of the other professional counties have gone down this demutualisation route as a result of the financial struggles that have been facing professional cricket in England. We saw Hampshire and Northamptonshire both demutualised, and Durham unfortunately faced financial collapse. More recently, Yorkshire has had financial difficulties, and Hampshire itself has been sold to the owner of the Indian Premier League franchise, the Delhi Capitals. The MCCC sale is notable, potential sale is notable because the MCCC does not own its home ground of Lords. That is owned by the Marylebone Cricket Club, the MCC, so forgive the confusing acronyms, and that it means that the MCCC, Middlesex, has not been able to exploit its commercial assets in the way that other professional counties have been able to do so. Now, a spokesperson for Middlesex this morning has declined to comment on this story, but it will be a notable moment in the world of English cricket as this process unfolds.
Mark, almost as confusing the structural makeup there as cricket itself for someone who doesn't frankly understand the game very well. But it does come at a time, I read in your report today that the ECB has received, I think, was it just over £500 million. Is this a sign that cricket financially is in a bit of financial trouble, bottom line?
Well, certainly some of the counties, as I say, have been facing financial difficulties in recent years. The auction of the 100 stakes, that are 49% stakes that are owned by the ECB, which are yet to be finalised, now going through a process of due diligence, that will certainly be a transformational, a landmark moment for the finances of English cricket, both for the professional game and the recreational game. You'll remember we were talking quite a lot in the last month or so about some of those auctions. The most lucrative of them was the auction, was the sale of the Lords-based London Spirit franchise. That fetched an overall value of £295 million. That's in line to be sold to a consortium of American technology billionaires, including the chief executives of Google and Microsoft. And my understanding is that they would be a logical party if Middlesex County Cricket Club does go down this route of demutualisation and sale. They would be a logical party to potentially inject some capital into Middlesex, given that they play their home matches at Lords.
OK, Mark, great stuff as always. And you can read Mark's full report on the Sky News website. Mark Climbing there live for us. Thank you. Now, millions of households will see the energy bills rise by 6.4% from April. Ofgem has increased its price cap, with the average bill for households in England, Scotland and Wales, which are on a standard variable tariff, will rise by 111 quid a year. It's the third time in a row that the price cap has increased, and it's gone up by more than expected. Ofgem predicts that bills will go down in the summer, but campaigners have called this increase today as devastating.
First, I recognise that this is very unwelcome news for consumers, many of whom have been struggling over the winter. The reason for today's increase and the reason we're seeing upward pressure on prices is the changes in the international gas markets, and we're seeing significant increases in the wholesale price of gas. And that's been driven by a number of factors, but they are international factors, and it is further evidence, to be honest, that we need to move away from that reliance on international gas and start looking at domestically generated energy, and that's why we're sort of very much supporting the government's move to Clean Power 2030 for that domestically generated energy.
Let's speak to Angela Knight, former Chief Executive of Energy UK, and of course the former Economic Secretary to the Treasury as well. Angela, very good morning to you. We keep calling this a price cap, don't we? But it's not really a cap in the sense that all the companies decide to pass on the full rate as it stands.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's what happens when you do try to control a market. And after all, the energy market is immensely controlled now by government in all sorts of ways, both in the generation side of electricity, but also, as you rightly say, on the supply side by capping both gas and electricity pricing for domestic consumers. In amongst that, by the way, in this cap is also a constraint on profit for the suppliers. So it's no longer a free market, and this was always expected to be the case. For those who said capping is going to provide a problem and reduce choice, they are correct in that. On the other side of the fence, there is an element of reasonable control, particularly for those who are not good at switching from one supplier to another. Today, it's a pity that price has gone up, the cap's gone up. It's gone up, of course, because there's been a cold winter in Europe. European gas supplies were previously coming a lot from Russia, and that cut off, so they had to go into storage. They're not connected to the North Sea, or many countries aren't connected to the North Sea, and therefore give them a cold winter, and you run down the storage. If you run down the storage, what happens? The price goes up in the wholesale markets. What I would expect is when we get to the next price cap, which is July, they could come down further than expected. And the reason I would think that is a possibility or a probability is that it looks like, whether we like it or not, and whatever our views may be, that there'll be some sort of a settlement or certainly a ceasing of that war in Ukraine, and that will be beneficial on the world gas prices. And so down will come that price, and down will come the cap.
But the thing here is, though, also, Angela, that we've talked about the fact it's been a cold winter. That's not helped. Obviously, clearly, what's happened with Ukraine and Russia has not helped. But we've been paying quite high energy prices in this country for a long time. There's something more fundamental here, isn't there?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of things there that are more fundamental. I mean, firstly, the cost of the green programme, the moving to more and more renewables, is expensive. A renewable gets a guaranteed price to start off with. Secondly, of course, you have to move the grid, and that's hugely expensive because we didn't build a grid in this country for offshore. We built a grid to pick up from the coal-fired power stations. You then, with so much of the renewable, it's wind, and that's more or less sort of at the east of the country in Scotland. So you've then got to build even more infrastructure to bring the electricity down into the southeast. Yeah. And at the same time, what we're doing with electricity is not building the essential low carbon backup in this country, which is the small-scale nuclear power. Note I said small-scale nuclear power stations, the ones that can be built in a couple of years' time, per station. When we're not focusing on that, and that exposes us more to both international fluctuating markets and to importing electricity from Europe, which again is subject to fluctuating prices.
Instead, Angela, we've just been looking at quite a happy Ed Miliband with some live pictures as you've been talking, and I say that because he would make the point that this is a transition period, but in the end they are building an infrastructure that makes us more resilient, less energy dependent on other countries, and in the long term that will bring bills down. Now we might disagree on how to get there, but doesn't the Energy Secretary have a point in that?
Well, he has a point. He doesn't have the whole point. It is certainly the point that the more we can generate electricity locally without using too much in the way of gas, the more we will be self-sufficient. But if you're going to do that, you can't do it with wind, because wind and solar, the sun only shines a part of the time, the wind only blows a part of the time. You need the backup. You need something that is there when those renewables are no longer working. And we haven't done that. And he hasn't done that. And that is a very big problem. And the second thing is we have a distorted way of calculating the price of electricity in the wholesale market in this country. It's distorted every half hour by what was the highest priced power required to meet the demand, and that then sets the price for the entirety of the wholesale pool, irrespective. So he needs to alter the algorithm, build the backup, get the small-scale nuclear working, get away from being dependent all the time on saying wind is good, and do it at a price that people can afford, and then I'd support him.
Okay, well, that's quite a long list. I will put it to him next time we have him on. Angela, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Angela Knight there, former Chief Executive of Energy UK. Don't forget, you can get more on this, how it's going to affect you. Maybe the best way to try and get a good deal, just log on to the Money blog, scan the QR code on your screen right now to access that on the Sky News app. Well, speaking about energy prices, they, of course, have remained high since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It appears that Europe is still dependent on Russia for gas and other goods such as fertiliser. And 3 years on from the start of the Ukraine war, sanctioned goods continue to make their way from Moscow. Well, our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been looking into the economic war that was waged on Putin to find out whether, essentially, it's worked or not.
How would you feel if I told you there was a critical ingredient that we're now more reliant on Russia for than we were before the invasion? When I say we, I mean Europe in general. Look at this, though, OK? Start with a bit of good news. This is wholesale gas prices. These, by the way, are not the prices we pay at home. The prices we pay at home are going up because of the price cap. But actually, the wholesale gas price has just started to come down quite a lot, 22% in the past fortnight. It might mean that bills might be more cheap in the future. But why is that happening? It's because people are looking at what's happening, thinking of potential peace talks and thinking that might push gas prices down because you've got more gas potentially going into Europe. And there hasn't been enough gas in Europe in recent months. And that's partly because there is not as much gas coming from Russia. This is showing you just the proportion of European gas, so EU gas coming from Russia. It used to be above 50%. It's come down an awful lot. Worth saying, if you include liquefied natural gas, it doesn't look like quite so much of a fall. But even so, less gas in Europe from Russia. And that's a bit of an issue, because if you look at all of the different kind of uses that gas plays in the economy in Europe, well, it's quite a lot of stuff, you know. It's transport, but it's also residential. So all those homes, it's heating the homes, it's going into power stations, but also it's going into industry, OK? So it's getting the factories working, it's producing chemicals. And when it comes to chemicals, one of the most important chemicals is fertiliser. And most fertiliser, most nitrogen fertiliser, is made from gas. It's a fossil fuel product. But because that gas is so expensive, not as much of it is being made in Europe, raising the question, where does it come from? Well, in the past, a lot of it came from Russia. And just look at what's happened with our European dependence on fertiliser from Russia. that has come down a bit, but whereas iron and steel is much lower than it was before, fertiliser, it's actually relatively high. And if we look not just at the share, but at the total amount, have a look at this chart, OK? So this is the total amount of nitrogen fertiliser, the most important type of fertiliser, coming from Russia, just in volume terms. And compare these two areas. So back 2018-19, best period to compare things to, because obviously that was the pandemic then. 2018-19, over that period, 4.6 million tonnes. Now look at the last 2 years, 4.9 million tonnes. So Europe is importing more fertiliser now from Russia than it was before the invasion. It's kind of striking, isn't it? And actually, if you look at where fertiliser, all types of fertiliser come from into Europe, it's pretty clear, isn't it? It's Russia. That was before the invasion. Now look, after the invasion, does anything change? Does the red bar change? Actually, the red bar goes up a bit. Really striking, isn't it? Worth saying, though, there is one country which doesn't have quite the same issue. It's the UK, because we banned the import of Russian and Belarusian fertiliser. So that's gone down basically to zero. And where's our fertiliser coming from? It's coming from the United States instead. But across Europe as a whole, that dependence on Russian fertiliser is actually going up, not down.
Ed Conway there. Now, Unilever has ousted its chief executive, Heinz Schumacher, after a little more than a year and a half in the role. The FTSE 100 consumer goods company, which includes brands such as Marmite, Dove and Ben & Jerry's, has been under pressure from investors in recent months. The company will replace him with a current chief financial officer, Fernando Fernandez. Well, let's bring Joshua Mahoney, chief market analyst at Scope Markets, for more on this and indeed the rest of the markets. I suppose, Joshua, the first question is, what has gone on here? This is a massive company, makes dozens of household brands, and yet not everything's been going very well recently.
Exactly, just 18 months into his job, and Schumacher's been pushed out in favour of somewhat of a maverick CFO. Some people have described him as. Certainly, Schumacher did a good job in terms of outlining the strategy, in terms of repositioning the company, and we saw a 30% rise in its share price from January to September in 2024. So markets clearly on board with what he was doing, but recently we saw a 5% decline in pre-tax profits and a slow start to 2025. So there's a feeling that he wasn't perhaps enabling his strategy as quickly as might be the case. They have come out and said that they think Fernandez is essentially the guy to push through change quickly. And so perhaps they think that Schumacher was the guy to set them up for the big drive forward, which is likely going to come under the custodianship of Fernandez.
Yeah, and the share price down, as viewers can see at home, down nearly 2% this morning. Talking about stocks that are down, US tech stocks also down. Been a bit of a roller coaster year for tech stocks. Just talk us through what's happening on the Nasdaq.
Yeah, so the Nasdaq was the big underperformer yesterday, falling over 1% on a day that we did see significant selling across some big names. One of the big names that's been selling off recently is Palantir. That it is a massive AI name, but it's heavily reliant on military spending, and there's question marks around that with the change of leadership at the White House, coming at the same time as there's a big question mark at the moment about stagflation. That means essentially question marks about growth and the potential for higher inflation. And that, of course, sort of ties the hands of the Federal Reserve. Friday, we saw the services PMI number coming out and it fell back below 50. That means they see contraction within US services. That's the lowest number in 2 years. At the same time, we saw a survey out of Michigan, which pointed towards the highest inflation expectations, the 5-year inflation expectations, since 1995. So a 30-year high for those inflation expectations. And so that all adds up to an environment where people are growing increasingly fearful and questioning whether we're somewhat overbought when it comes to US tech. Remember, Warren Buffett continuing to take money out and put it into cash, stating that he didn't necessarily see any opportunities within the markets right now. So people are quite fearful as to whether US markets right now are perceived to be relatively overvalued. And that's why European markets are really outperforming.
Yeah, fascinating, Joshua, isn't it? Because we've got used to a pretty buoyant US economy, but that is far from guaranteed, as you have suggested. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Joshua Mahoney there from Scope Markets. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, can the government win over angry farmers without backing down over its changes to inheritance tax? We'll be live at that union meeting that's taking place in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling. It's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Now, the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid, has been trying to win over farmers this morning, addressing the National Farmers Union Conference. He's been announcing a number of policy sweeteners for farmers who are clearly very angry over the decision to impose inheritance tax on farms. NFU has accused the government of driving through morally wrong policies. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, who you can see is at that conference in central London. Serena, very good morning to you. How did Steve Reid go down with those farmers?
Well, in a word, badly. Two words, very badly. It's the issue, as you say, for farmers that sucks up all the oxygen in the room. It's the only thing they want to talk about, and they're very, very angry about it. And this is, of course, the government's change to introduce inheritance tax on some of their assets. So after their assets are £1 million, 20% inheritance tax would be then imposed. Now, they've taken to the streets with their anger. Tractors have been running up Whitehall in recent weeks. There's one actually here today that was very, very loud earlier. You could actually hear it through Steve Reed's speech. And that's why he was here. That's why the minister was here. He was trying to sow some goodwill. He was trying to announce a few sweeteners for farmers. But the speech immediately before him was all talking about the family farm tax, saying they will fight it until ministers do the right thing. Steve Reed, on the other hand, is saying it's a policy that won't change. They've made their decision, and instead he wants to focus on profitability for farms. Now, farmers have felt let down for a long while. This is, as the minister says, the straw that broke the camel's back for some, but it is the one thing that they want to talk about, and he was pummeled with questions over and over again on this single specific tax policy, and by the end he was struggling to answer. It was quite uncomfortable for the minister.
I suppose the big question is, from a political point of view, is this a right that Labour in many ways doesn't mind having?
I think that's a difficult one to answer. It sounds like they're not backing down, so they are having it. There was rumours that Steve Reed only knew about 24 hours before the budget this was happening. He did say today he was sorry about the shock of the announcement, that he realised that he hadn't lay any groundwork for it, that farmers were unprepared. Some of them are still not prepared for planning it. In terms of whether government want to fight or not, they know how angry farmers are. Steve Reed is here today trying to sow some goodwill, trying to offer them and build up that relationship. He's here answering those difficult questions, and they were very, very difficult. Usually you have 5 or 6 different topics at the end of the Q&A session. This was farmer after farmer after farmer lining up, fully impassioned, speaking about this issue.
Okay.
You've got them protesting on the streets. Whether or not Labour have planned for this, they are definitely in the middle of a fight.
OK. Serena Bockasing live there in Central London. Thank you very much indeed. OK, that is it from me for the moment. Back, of course, at 4:30 this afternoon. Coming up next, it is Jane Secker, including Prime Minister due to address the House of Commons on defence spending. That is up next here on Sky News. I will see you later.